what is the one thing that Idaho could do to step closer toward a blended learning model that you described?
I think the one thing from a policy perspective that Idaho should do toward moving toward the student-centered model that really blends learning for every child is really move beyond the seat time-based system that we have in place right now to a competency-based one in which we say for every child your learning will be fixed, but the time will be variable. You might take different pathways to learning, but you'll only move on from a concept once you've truly mastered it. To me, that would be the biggest thing Idaho could do right now to put itself on a pathway towards student-centered learning.
How do you, okay, and some of the changes might seem daunting to a lot of educators and to administrators. So how do you free up schools to pursue some of these alternative paths?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think one of the reasons we're writing our next book right now on this topic is just to answer it. But my sense is that schools, what they need to do is start with what problem are you trying to solve? Start with a question of this is what the educational outcome, and those outcomes should be around boosting student learning gains, not technology for technology's sake or something like that, but true learning gains for students. And once you've identified your problem, some problems are what I would think of as core academic problems. And for those, I actually think some simple moves into some station rotations or flipped classrooms of blended learning are not huge lifts on the current system. You can do it within a given classroom. You don't need to turn over your entire school. Make those interim steps. For other problems, there are problems of extending access to courses you've never had or things like that. And that's where I think you should start launching your disruptive models, things that are outside of your current core. Start experimenting in those areas with radically new models that can personalize for students. And as you perfect those things, start getting better and better, then start shifting more and more of your program over to those bit by bit. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater from day one.
Okay. I think along the same lines of that questioning, getting schools ready is one thing. How about teachers who have been brought up under a system that resembles the factory system you described? How do we get teachers ready to do this?
This is a hard question because teachers really, their preparation has been around classroom management, lesson planning, a lot of things that become irrelevant in this new system because for the first time, computers sort of do what computers do uniquely well so that it frees humans up to do what humans all along should have been doing, which is focusing on relationships with kids, those magic light bulb moments with students, working one-on-one with students, small group instruction. And so some of those things I think teachers will take well to because in many ways it's the reason that they got into education in the first place. But there's no question we have to prepare them for these opportunities more. And so I think from a school level, probably not a district or state level, but from a school level, making a very concerted effort to create professional learning communities and professional development opportunities in on-demand ways, depending on what each individual teacher needs. Really a personalized learning for each teacher is really important so that if you're really struggling with how to read data, you can get help online on how to read the data systems better. But if another teacher is really struggling with how do I facilitate project-based learning and ask good Socratic questions, well, that's a very different skill set that you're going to want a different intervention for. And so I think the one thing to move away from is these professional development sessions that happen 4 times a year where all these teachers crowd into one room and an expert drones on whatever the school thought was a priority, and really moving toward that personalized professional development for each teacher so that they can be prepared for the model in which they're teaching. And that's the last point, which is it shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all professional development, but figure out the needs that your particular learning design have and tailor the instruction accordingly for the teacher.
You touched on this some, and I think that one of the questions I didn't get to ask was how do we go about measuring some of these maybe softer skills that we're asking teachers to impart and students to pick up on? You talked about disaggregating the teacher into these new roles. Is it worthwhile, and if so, how do you measure those new?
This is the coin of the realm, I think, that where people are struggling with still. KIPP and some other schools are making some progress in thinking about how do you measure persistence and grit and some of those quote-unquote non-cognitive skills that we know are so important to life success. It's interesting, the PISA test actually can look at who fills out the optional information about your demographics and predict student and life performance in some pretty interesting ways. We don't know why, but they can do that. So I think coming up and investing in creative ways to measure those non-cognitive skills is really important, but I don't think there's a tried and true way to do it yet, but that's clearly part of preparing the whole child, and it's something we need to think about more.
One of the graphics you showed in your presentation was the Khan Academy graphic of the student making sudden gains and becoming one of the higher performing students. And the question was asked, what do we do about the other students who didn't quite hit the same kind of curve? How does the blended learning system accommodate and help those students?
Yeah, so my sense is that some students, when they get into these environments, they're just going to fly. They're just going to take off because it's like the shackles are off them. It was one thing holding them back, or maybe it was nothing holding them back except the calendar pacing of lessons. And now they can fly. And some students, they're not going to be quite sure how to own their learning because they've been used to sitting back, sort of letting learning happening at them, not sort of being passive. And in many ways, this is why the teacher's job becomes so important, because they're going to spend a lot more time probably with those kids, helping motivate them, make sure that they stay on track, really encourage them and show them that they can do that. And the key, I think, is really to be able to deliver the right learning experience at the right time for those students, to say, what are you actually struggling with here? And being able to deliver that intervention, because my experience is that once you unlock the things that were actually tripping up the student, the misconception or the hole in their knowledge or whatever it was, they actually start flying too. And we, I think, do a disservice and give our students too little credit for being able to move much faster because our system just doesn't let them today. So my sense is actually it frees up teachers' time to support those students far more and let them fly much faster once they get going.
We had a room full of legislators today who I know have one question on their mind, and it's a killer question I asked you at the end, but I'll ask it again now. How do you pay for this? How much does it cost, and is it doable for a small state?
Yeah, so I think it's doable. I think in some ways a small state has the luxury of closer relationships, which allow navigating this to be more possible than a place like, say, California, where I just left, where it's so gargantuan you don't even know where to start. That's the nice thing, I think. My sense is that there's an upfront cost to transitioning this, the professional development, moving to learning models and so forth, but there are a lot of cost gains on the backside, I think. And so, for example, school buildings, school construction. We spend right now inordinate amounts of money constructing these mausoleums to the past of how we've educated, when what I've seen in these blended learning environments is you can have far leaner and greener schools that both cost less to construct and cost less to operate on an ongoing basis, and empower students more. They're more friendly. They're not linoleum, ugly fluorescent light places for students. And I think if we can start to revisit some of those assumptions, there's some big opportunities to unlock some cost gains down the road. In terms of an ongoing funding system, I think the ultimate answer, it could be 20 years from now, I don't know, is one that replaces funding average daily attendance with the true progress and mastery that each student makes, and probably weights it according to risk factors and some measure of student growth, so that we reward those schools and teachers that can do the most with the students who are the furthest behind.